everybody, welcome back for week 3 of pottery class, where we're going to learn how to build a square box out of hard clay slabs. So if you want to pull out your pottery kit, including your workboard and all your tools, and then gather a few extra tools for today's project. We're going to need a ruler, a piece of paper, and a pen to create a template and pattern for the box we're going to make today. So if you want to gather those tools together, we'll begin. Before we ever roll out a slab of clay, let's make the template for our project. So the box that I'm going to make today is going to be about 5 inches at the base, and we'll have a nice 3-inch wall, and we'll make a lid to go with it. So to start with, on your piece of paper, let's mark out a 5 by 5 inch square, and then we'll mark out size for it as well. So I'm going to take my ruler right at the corner of the paper where I know I have a nice true 90-degree corner and begin marking out my square. Okay, so I have the first 3 parts of my box's template made now. I've got my square that will be the template for the base and also for the lid. I've got my 2 walls to start with. Now I haven't made the second or the third and fourth walls yet because I will be making them a little bit longer so that when we're working with a thick clay slab, if this clay is 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch thick, I need my walls on the ends to be long enough to overlap at the corner where we can score and slip them together. So to work with on this box, let's work with closer to a 1/2 inch slab just so we have some good stability. We're going to account for 1/2 inch, and if we get a little bit off from that, we can trim it off in the clay. So if I am adding a 1/2 inch on each end with these 2 walls, then I need to make my last end slabs be 5 inches plus a 1/2 inch plus a 1/2 inch, which is going to be 6 inches total. So I'll make 2 more panels that are 6 inches long. Okay, now that I have the 4 pieces of my template cut out, I can set them aside and begin to get my clay into a slab form and ready to build. So just like we did in the first project, we're going to roll or throw out clay slabs. This time we're going to be making them about a 1/2 inch in thickness. So if you keep your ruler around, you can use that to check your thickness as you go. And I will demo this time how to throw out the clay slab. You can continue to use your rolling pin if that is comfortable for you, but if you don't have access to a rolling pin, then this is another way that you can prepare a slab. So getting out my clay, I've got a good clay ball. This is more than I'm going to need for any one of those templates, but I'm hoping to be able to cut 1 or 2 out of each piece of clay. So taking this clay ball, I'm going to start by blocking it out on the tabletop. Until I start to see it in this cube shape. So from there, I'm going to pat it out with the heel of my hand for a second. I'm just trying to flatten it enough that I have more length and less thickness. Okay, now that I've patted it out until it's about 1 inch thick, it's kind of roughly 1 inch thick, a little bit thinner here, thicker there, I'm going to begin to throw this slab out on my board, making it get thinner each time, and it'll lengthen it as well. So the trick to this is not just slapping the clay down flat on the table, but holding it gently at the end. I'm not gripping it and digging it with my fingers, I'm holding it with long, soft fingers at one end. I'm going to take it and I'm going to throw it down so that the end catches the board, and I pull on the clay for a minute before I release it to finish slapping onto the table. So watch this for a second. So you can see how much it lengthened even with just a few slaps onto the table. Now that it's getting long and narrow this way, I'm gonna turn it and pull it a few times this way to widen it here. Alright, so now I've got a fair-sized slab to work with. This one will be good for the base. So for the base and lid, I'm gonna make them a little bit thinner than the walls because we just need a 1/4 inch thickness to have a good stable base. But we'll make the walls thicker so that as we're standing them on end, we have more surface for attaching on. So making the lid and base out of this slab, I'm going to just set it aside and prepare my next slab for the walls. And this one I will leave to be about 1/2 inch thick. Okay, now that I have all of the slabs thrown out for everything I will need, I'm going to spend a little bit of time smoothing them with my metal rib. Just taking that rib, laid kind of flat on the slab, and just with a little bit of pressure, dragging it along the surface to get rid of any rough areas, to even out any high points, and just to smooth it and give it a really nice finish is my goal. So I'm going to do that on each of the slabs, front and back. Alright, so now that my slabs are smoothed, I'm going to take my templates and lay them out on the slab and just trim them out like I'm making a cookie cutter cut, where I just follow the line of my paper template and pull away the extra clay. And I can save that clay in my bag when I finish. So a nice angled needle tool will cut through that clay really easily without digging too much into your wear board. I can pull these scraps aside and I'll roll them back up into a ball and use them again later. But there's my first 6 inch by 3 inch slab, and I'll go ahead and do the others. Alright, so the final square slab that I'm going to make is going to be the lid for this box that I'm making. So this one I just finished is the base. I realized as I was constructing it that if I'm building with 1/2 inch slabs on all the sides of this box, it's going to add 1/2 inch on every side to the 5 inches, meaning this lid square needs to be 6 inches by 6 inches. So I'm going to put my two 6 inch rectangles together on this slab and cut it out to size that way. My slab is a little bit too short right here. I'm going to go ahead and just throw it out one more time, gently, to stretch that corner out a little bit farther. That will work. To re-smooth. Make sure I have a really nice surface here. So instead of 5 by 5 for the lid, you want it to be 6 inches by 6 inches. All right, with those in place, we'll trace it out. And set it aside to join the others. So I have a base, 4 sides, and a lid, all cut out of the clay. The base and lid can be 1/4 inch in thickness, and the sides should be closer to 1/2 inch in thickness. Okay, now that I have all of these slabs prepared, we're going to take about 15 minutes to 20 minutes to let them just wick some of the moisture off into the board and into the air. So if you come back and you feel that they're less tacky or less likely to smush out of shape as you press into them, that's when we want to do our next step. in the meantime, if you want to go around your house and look for some sort of object that you think would make an interesting texture when pressed into the slab, that is going to be our next step. We're going to decorate these surfaces before we assemble them so that we have a nice, interesting pattern on each of the surfaces to decorate your box. Alright, so it's been about 20 minutes that I've let these slabs sit and dry, and now they're no longer incredibly sticky to touch. The gloss on the surface has kind of gone away. I can also pick them up and they're not flopping. They still have a lot of flex to them, as you can see there, but they are fairly stiff. So if I were to hold it with one hand, it's bending a little bit, but it's holding its flatness for the most part. So that's where I want them to be for my next step. Or if I pressed my finger in, I could make a dent in this. Not so hard that it won't resist a fingerprint, but it's not squishy, sticky, shiny, tacky to touch. So before we begin our assembly, I want to spend a little bit of time cleaning up the edges of the slabs and also creating a decorative texture on the surface. So if you have gathered some sort of texturing tool, I'll show you a few examples of what you might use. You could use just simply the end of your needle tool, which pressed in would just make these little dot textures. You could use something larger like the end of a Sharpie. This would make an indent that's tapered and also have that extra little dot in the center. I'm going to use the end of this clothespin pressed in and alternating its angle to make this double-lined texture across the surface of my slabs. Before I start texturing, I am going to go over them one more time pretty gently with this metal rib. I want to be careful not to damage the edges and my crisp corners, but I am going to try and clean up some of the fingerprints that I left as I was moving them around while they were wet. So I'm going to take just a minute and clean each of these slabs. Okay, so let's talk about texturing each of our slabs for a minute. So before I begin, I'm going to use my finger and just soften and straighten these edges of my rectangular slab. Give it kind of a final wipe so I have a really nice clean surface to work on. I'm going to take my clothespin, which I'm using for my texturing tool, and I'm going to spend some time just going across this whole surface. Only one side of the surface, because the inside will be the smooth interior of the box. This top side will be the textured, decorated outside of the box. So getting my slab prepped by making sure it's smooth and clean, and then I'm going to take this clothespin end, starting just a little bit inside the first corner. I'm going to press it in, rotate it, and press the next side in. Rotate it again, press, rotate, press. And you want to do a deep enough press that it's really like a good, deep, substantial imprint. If it's pretty shallow, the glazes will cover it and you won't see your details at the end. So pressing about 1/3 of the way into the clay is a good gauge for how deep to press as you're going to get a really nice, clear, dramatic print. So I'm going to go ahead and speed through the decorating of these tiles so you can watch that. Okay, so now I have all 6 parts textured with my decorative stamping, and I am ready to let them dry a little more until that they can hold their form as I'm building the sides and walls to this box. So I'm going to leave them for another 30 minutes and check them after that. And we'll talk about the perfect wetness, dryness when we get there. So these ones, I have a few of these pieces that are close, where I can hold it out and it's not bending. It does still have some flex, and as you touch it, it does still have some dampness to it, which is good for joining the sides. But I want them all to have that same amount of strength. Some of these are a little soft still, so I will give it another 20 to 30 minutes. See, that one's too wet. It won't hold its straight wall as I construct it. So in 20 to 30 minutes, we'll come back and begin our assembly. Okay, so I have given these slabs a chance to stiffen a little more, and now all of them can hold their own form when just being held by the end. I still want to handle them gently. I don't want to dent or ding their edges. I want to keep them as straight as I can so we have a nice crisp box form. But we are ready to begin constructing this stiff slab box. So I have my base here in front of me, and we'll be working first on putting the walls around it and attaching them together so we have our box form. So to begin with, I'm going to take one of my shorter 5-inch slabs, which are the same length as this box's walls. I'm going to make sure that they meet up pretty nicely. If I need to trim them down so that these edges are flush and match, then I can do that. It looks like it's a good fit. So before I do anything, I'm going to take the slab and just tap it on the tabletop to make sure I have a nice flat bottom edge there. And I'm going to do the same thing all around this base's sides, supporting that slab so it doesn't bend as I tap it, but I'm going to just take those straight edges and tap them into the tabletop so I get a good, sharp, flat side for my attachments. Okay, so laying that back down, I'm going to set that piece against the wall here, and with my needle tool, I'm just going to very gently mark where the line of the bottom of the slab meets my side wall. When I take it away, that mark will show me where I need to score and slip for my attachment. So I'm going to go along that line, scoring really thoroughly. Alright, so now I have this wall scored at the bottom where it will meet the base, and the base is scored along that side where it will meet that wall. I'm now going to lay that base flat on the table and take this wall, standing it on end, and start to press it in to meet the base right along that edge where I've scored and slipped. So once I've set it in place on the outside of that wall, I'm going to go along pressing in against the wall to make sure that that toothy jagged area that you've scored is locking together. So I'm going to make sure I'm pressing it in so I know those pieces are really locking in together. And then very carefully I'm going to turn this box, and you can see where some of that has oozed out. You can use your finger and smooth some of that away, or you can take the end of your wooden tool. I'll take this wider backside and just run it along that corner, and that will clean up any of those wet, goopy things that have squeezed out of that seam. But that seam should be well attached now, and with my slabs being stiff, this wall will stand on its own. It will be fragile. If I'm moving it around, it will separate, so I'm going to try to move it as little as possible as I work on the next pieces. I'll just gently rotate it, keeping it set on the table as I go from here. So my next piece, because I used the shorter piece first, this next side is going to be a longer piece. that will overlap here on this end and down at the base again here. So I'll score along the base of this new wall and up one side. So to start with, I'm going to start just like I did before, taking that base of that wall and setting it in place against the existing pieces. I might need to shape this piece up if it's slumped at all to make sure it lines up nicely at the corner. I'm going to press it in against the base at the bottom and take my needle tool and just draw a light line along the top of this base and along this line in the corner. So now when I take this piece away, I have my areas marked that I need to score. So that's my close to 1/2 inch from this wall, and that's my 1/4 inch from the base here. So I'll score and slip all along that. I'll score and slip all along the existing form, and I will attach them. And I'll continue around the sides of the box. Okay, so I have all 4 walls constructed and attached in place. Now before I go any further, I want to go back over every seam and compress the side into the piece it's attached to make sure that there's no chance of those splitting apart or separating as your piece dries. So I'm going to find every seam that I've made and just with some nice steady pressure with my fingers, go back over it, pushing them into place. Making sure I don't see any gaps, especially, and making sure that I've just double checked that everything is well locked together. Now I can go around to any corners that are rough, like this one. I can even set this piece on its side. These pieces should be stiff enough that it supports its own weight, but I can go and just gently wipe away the slip that has pushed out of that seam, and using my finger just smooth and do some nice detail work on those edges. So I'm going to go over any seams that I don't like the way they look on the outside, and any kind of compressing that you can do where you're just blending those seams together will help them lock into place. So one last area I want to treat is this bottom. So because my rim is even, I can set this piece upside down and just very gently go along the bottom with my finger and blend these seams into place. You don't want to push on the bottom here because there's no support. These pieces are attached around the outside of the base. So I just want to make sure that these outside bordering pieces are blending with the base piece on the bottom. You can take your metal rib and go over that as well, and that'll be helpful for just some finishing touches and making it look really nice here on the bottom. Right now, I want to concentrate my attention on these seams. So when I am over the walls, I can press fairly hard with this rib and really flatten those bottom walls and blend their seams with this tool. I can use my finger along all the edges one more time to soften that base line so it's not sharp when it dries. Always good to roll those sharp edges into a slightly softer corner. Now I can gently turn this box back over. If your walls have bowed in at all, you can just gently flex them back out to be straight. So making sure my walls are straight, I'm going to get my sponge just a little bit damp. And I'm going to run that sponge across the rim a number of times to wet it and wipe away sharp edges. And then with my finger, I'm going to finish that off. I'm going to go along the rim, just flattening any uneven areas, wetting and smoothing any sharp areas. I want to make sure this stays very flat and true because this is where the lid will be sitting, and you want to make sure that it will sit nice and flat. Okay, so I have my lid in front of me, and I can just do a check on top of my box and see that I like the way it fits. And if I like the way it fits, now I'm going to just spend some time doing some nice cleanup for the lid, and then we'll turn it over and we will make a little drop ring on the inside that will sit into the box and keep it from sliding off of the top of the box, because if it was just the flat clay on top of the rim, if you ever move the box, it'll just slide off. But we'll make a little stop on the inside to keep it steady when it's on the rim of your box. So first, let's do a little bit of cleanup and take my sponge and just wipe all of the edges, which will soften those sharp cut edges. Give it a nice finished look. I spent a lot of time treating this. I think I've decided I'd like one more ring of the texture around the rim here. Now that I know that it fits my finished box, I can choose to add that in. I left it blank because if I needed to trim any of these edges as I finish my box, I don't want to have to trim away my pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and add that texture in before I continue. Alright, so with that texture added, I'm going to turn my lid over to the bottom side. I can continue to do any smoothing and finishing work that I see is needed. Now I'm going to take some clay from my bag and roll out a coil, just like we've been doing for last week's lesson. I'm going to keep this coil fairly thick because I want it to create a deep enough stop on the inside of this lid that it'll set into the box, interior of the box pretty well, and keep it from sliding and rattling around. Alright, so I'm rolling this coil out long enough that I can make it around the interior ring of this box size, but thick enough that as it sets in, it'll really create a nice stop. So knowing that my walls here are 1/2 inch to 1/4 of an inch in thickness, I can just make sure I go in a full 1/2 inch on every side when I attach my coil and know that this will go inside the box and not get stuck here. So we're going to just take a ruler here and mark along the rim of this lid a good 1/2 inch depth to make sure that this coil lands at a correct place. Okay, so with those lines scribed in place, I can start to gauge where I want to put my coil. I'm not going to lock it in place until I have scored and slipped both it and the bottom of this lid, but I can see how much coil I'll need by just laying it inside those lines. And I'll pinch it off here where it's overlapping. Now to make that a really nice fit here in the corner, I'll take it where it's overlapped like this and just cut down with my needle tool. If I lift this away and pull away these scraps, now these two ends fit together at a 45-degree angle and make the nice corner. For these sides, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to hit it right in the corner so I can straighten that coil out. These coil out. And when I score and slip them, I'll be able to attach them together there. Alright, with all of these corners cut and fitted together, I'm just going to take these coils one at a time, lift them out, score below them, and score the bottom side of the coil. I'll slip them and attach them, and I'll just make my way around the square doing that, and then at the end I'll do some finishing and shaping work to this little interior square. So I've got each of these coils attached into place, making this interior square. I can check that again on my box to make sure that this interior square sits into the inside of my box. So I'm going to check to make sure that fits well, and it does. So I've got just a little bit of give before it catches and stops that lid from falling off. So I'm going to take it back off and just finish polishing up this area here. So I want to take my wooden tool and dip it in some water, and I'm just going to use this fatter back end of it to run along the lines where these coils meet the bottom of the lid. Now just using my fingers, I can finish smoothing these and get them nice and polished looking, make them just look really nice feeling. I just want to make sure I keep a nice straight line here on this outside. Alright, final touches will be right here in the corners. Just kind of blending those seams. I'll do it with the wooden tool first, and then my fingers after. Alright, so now I'm just going to take my sponge, clean up any marks that I left here on the bottom of this lid. And before I turn this over, I want to leave it out to dry long enough that these clay coils are stiff in the same degree as the lid. If I put them down while it's soft, they might mash or reshape into a way that doesn't quite fit the box. So I'm going to leave it to dry upside down like this until these coils are a good leather hard.